Addis Business Talk with Khalid and Marid on Afro FM 105.3. We'll be talking to policymakers, investors, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to bring you the latest development taking place in the Ethiopian economic and business climate, and more importantly, what it means to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Addis Ababa. This is Addis Business Talk with Khalid and Merid every Thursday morning on Afro FM 105.3. My name is Khalid Maui, along with my co-host David Desta. Thank you everyone for joining us. The show is brought to you by Pragma Investment Advisory, an investment management and business advisory firm based in Addis Ababa, along with our partners at 251 Communications, a prominent marketing and communications firm based in Addis as well. Now, our guest today is David Desta. David is an associate with JLL's Hotel and Hospitality Group in Sub-Saharan Africa. JLL is a leading global professional services firm that specializes in real estate and investment management, and a group that is a market leader working with investors, lenders, owners, and operators to achieve high returns on their asset throughout the lifestyle of property ownership. And I'm sure David will elaborate on that a little bit later. David has a hospitality and tourism background with substantial experience in East Africa. His exposure spans across the hospitality, tourism, and real estate sectors. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Cornell University's School of Hotel Administration. Our main topics of discussion: an overview of the hospitality and tourism industry and sector in Ethiopia, impact of COVID-19 on the industry, human capital, opportunities and prospects looking into the future, and more. David, welcome to Addis Business Talk.
Thank you for having me, Khalid and Merid. It's great to be here.
Thanks. Pleasure. Now, let's kick it off with a story about David, your background, basically. If you can share with us your story, where did you grow up, what was your upbringing like? Cornell, great school, obviously. How was your stay there? And what does your professional journey look like? And I think lastly, why hotels, why hospitality? Where does that, I assume, passion come from?
Okay, definitely. So just to give some background information, I was essentially born and raised outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And at the age of 8, my parents moved back to Ethiopia in 2000. So during this period, it was a great eye-opening experience. It was essentially my first time in Ethiopia at an age where I can grasp and understand the country as a whole. And during that time, I finished high school here at Sanford International School, where I completed my IB program and essentially, learned and fell in love with the country of Ethiopia. And it's pretty funny because at that moment, I guess it was the beginning of many diasporas starting to move back to Ethiopia. And I had all my friends questioning like, oh, why are you going? What are you going to do there? What is it like? So I think by moving here, it definitely opened up my perspective, my understanding of the world as a whole, and definitely, I guess, the love of the culture and the people here. So after graduating from Sanford International School, I went to Cornell and I decided to enroll in their hotel program. And my background in the hotel industry at that moment was essentially very limited. My parents used to run a small guest house in the British Embassy area. So that kind of introduced me to the hospitality industry. I used to spend my time there after school. I used to see a lot of guests coming in and out. And I guess it kind of like opened up my appetite for travel and also hotels. And I think that was probably one of the most biggest factors in, going to the hotel or hospitality industry. So during my time at Cornell, it was an amazing experience, definitely extremely cold, being up in the middle of upstate New York, but it was a great experience. The program there is phenomenal. The faculty, the ability to connect with other individuals from across the world who have that same passion and focus in the hospitality and hotel industry was great. And I think it really expanded my understanding and I guess kind of drove my desire to move back to Ethiopia, because at that moment the industry was still in its infancy. I think the only branded hotels or major properties were the Sheraton Addis and the Hilton, and there were these huge, awe-inspiring properties, and it just showed what the potential was in this country. Mm-hmm. So at After I graduated, I decided to make that leap. I actually came back to Ethiopia for a 1 month vacation, but then I ended up canceling my return ticket and stayed here. So
Wow.
I think it just showed like how much I miss the country, how I miss living here, and the opportunity I saw in the market. So that kind of just wraps up my, passion and understanding or reason for coming back. But
And
coming back was definitely something I had to adjust to, especially with all the issues with, bureaucracy, language, and I guess just getting a grasp of the local business environment. So
Mm.
the first thing I did was essentially get a short-term internship at Ernest& and Young, just to,
oh,
get myself up to speed. And I was there for around 2 months. Most of the projects were essentially in an internship kind of capacity, but nonetheless, it was a great experience. And after that short stay, I reached out to Tadios of Kurta Resorts and wondered if they had a vacancy in their group. And I was very grateful that they took me in. I spent 3.5 amazing years with the group, and it really opened up my understanding of Ethiopia and all the issues that affect industry and how business investors need to pivot and be on their toes at any single moment. And my time at Curve 2 was great. I was able to work in different departments, spanning from operations to project management. I dabbled in some design work where I worked alongside Yonile, which is currently working at the group there as well. And yeah, I think it just really gave me the understanding of the local industry from a luxury boutique hospitality product. So that's something I think really helped me adjust and get used to everything in this country. But following that stint, I decided it was time to, pivot and get more exposure in a different segment. And the opportunity to open Blue Space with their investors became available. And just for context, Blue Space is Ethiopia's, I think, first flexible office provider. So very similar to the WeWork concept. And that in itself just completely just, it was a kind of a 180 moving, or not 180, but a shift from giving customer service to more of a real estate aspect. And yeah, I think those experiences definitely helped mold and give me a well-versed experience in Addis and Ethiopia as a whole. And regarding my time at JLL, I joined JLL 6 months ago, and I've been working remotely out of Addis, but will hopefully make my way down to South Africa once the borders open and the restrictions due to the pandemic ease. So yeah, that's essentially the gist of me.
Awesome breakdown. Thanks for that, David. Let me try to ping you back to this is like completely impromptu, right? Ping you back to Ernest and Young. So you mentioned how you interned there for about 2 months. So I also did intern there about this is back in 2015, right? For about 3 months as well. Let me ask you something. Have you worked on? I know it's pretty confidential to talk about the specific projects, but have you worked on a hospitality project at Ernest and Young?
Unfortunately, I did not.
Okay.
As soon as I arrived, I think the project was already complete.
Oh, I
Therefore,
see.
there was not much work to do on that project.
Okay.
But I remember going through the study, and I was pretty impressed with the, insights and advisory work
Yeah.
that they did for that specific property.
Okay. Okay. So I did the same thing. I went through the same project and was impressed as well. And I figured you're the one who did it.
Unfortunately, I didn't, but it gave me some
uh,
good insight on the macro, perspective of Ethiopia and the industry as a whole. So that was a
I'm
great
sure.
benchmark, eye-opening experience.
I'm sure. Great company.
interesting, David. Now let's talk about you. Let's talk about JLL Hotel and Hospitality Group. I know that JLL is a Fortune 500 company, is a global company. Give us a background whose JLL is, what's the global operation looks like, what do you do specifically, and what's your operation here in Sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly here in Ethiopia?
Right, definitely. So as you mentioned, JLL stands for Joan Long LaSalle, and it was essentially a company that started in 1780 as an auctioneer firm in New York. But since then, it's been, combined and consolidated into a larger real estate investment group. The company currently has operations in over 80 countries and a global workforce upwards of 90,000 people. And what JLL does is essentially help real estate owners, occupiers, and investors achieve their business ambitions. As a company, we are very well versed in real estate across several industries. And this ranges from data centers, financial services, healthcare, education, industrial, office, retail, hotels, and so on, just to name a few. But it continues into various segments. So that's currently, I guess, a roundup of the company as a whole. Whereas the hotels and hospitality group, where I work, is a subdivision that is primed in mostly real estate and hospitality services alone. When it comes to experience in Sub-Saharan Africa, JLL is actively present throughout Africa with offices currently in Johannesburg, which is our regional office for Sub-Saharan Africa. We have an office in Nairobi, Casablanca, and Cairo. And our division is kind of branched or associated with the Middle East and Africa division, which is headquartered out of Dubai. So that just kind of gives an idea of our exposure throughout the continent. In terms of hospitality projects, we have been active in around upwards of 25 to 34 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and the continent. And that's something we pride ourselves on and we're proud of because we're able to enter new markets, learn more, and I guess, like I said, help investors to find the best approach for their new projects. And when it comes to Ethiopia, we have been active in the market over the years, advising and consulting our clients throughout the entire hotel cycle. And we do work from conducting feasibility studies, operator selections, financial advisory, and investment sales. And I can't really go into a lot of details on projects we've done currently in Ethiopia, but it includes the Radisson, the Lagar project, and other investment sale deals, which we are currently working on as well. But as a group, we are very excited about the Ethiopian market, and we definitely look forward to working with investors to achieve their ambitions. When it comes to Ethiopia as a whole, the hospitality advising section has been, should I say, consolidated or controlled by one or two local firms. We're now trying to enter this market and I guess showcase to people who are interested in either any real estate project or hotels that we can help devise a solution.
Interesting. So do you have an office here or are you planning to open now?
So we do not have an office here, and right now our major offices are going to be in Johannesburg and Nairobi. But given our ability to move and our exposure throughout the region, we have our teams dispatched from these offices to complete studies and projects. In terms of opening an office in Addis, not at this moment, but you never know. It depends on our growth and our, I guess, insight, or should I say, interest in Addis. But at the moment, like I said, we are comfortable with our regional offices in Nairobi and Johannesburg.
Great. I think our audience probably are more clear now on what JLL Group does and what their scope of work is. So thank you for kind of giving us that breakdown. Now, before we talk about the elephant in the room, which is, of course, COVID-19, let's try to hear from you about what your assessment is as an expert in Ethiopian hospitality, the business of hotels, your assessment of what the trends look like in this landscape. So things like growth patterns, demand and supply, investment trends, of course, the opportunities in this market. How do you assess that, and what's your take on that?
I guess a great place to start would be, I guess, an overall macro view of Ethiopia. Over the past decade, the country has experienced economic growth and currently undergoing political reforms since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took office. And looking at the country as a whole, the introduction and ratification of the African Free Trade Agreement, the liberated air transport market, and Addis Ababa being the political capital of Africa, has definitely been significant for the hotel sector. We definitely see that these drivers are beneficiary to the hotel segment, albeit there are definitely some, should I say, headwinds in the short term that the country is experiencing. And ideally, I believe that the homegrown economic reform and other policies should definitely alleviate and help address the challenges facing the economy and investor sentiment as a whole. And this kind of just focuses on the inability to access foreign exchange, how difficult it is to access financing, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and obviously some poor internet services. And I think, and our team believe, that these have been some of the most detrimental factors to conducting business in the country. But over the past 2 years, especially with the news of several key sectors, primarily are ideally opening to competition, primarily in transport, logistics, telecommunications, and manufacturing. These initiatives will definitely help attract private investment and catalyze, should I say, the value-added services in the country. And we believe that these opportunities will be great for the hotel sector, and that associated activity will lead to hotel demand far outgrowing GDP growth, because essentially this kind of ties in hand. But like I said, the market as a whole, when it comes to tourism arrivals, of course, Ethiopia has had a little rocky path over the past few years, but something that needs to be, I guess, stated is that Ethiopian Airlines has been probably the biggest contributor and, should I say, promoter of the country. And their growth, their ability to carry 14 million travelers a year, and with 70% of those coming through the Addis Ababa hub, definitely speaks volumes on where this country can go. But it essentially just needs the right policies and the right, should I say, the right direction and guidance. And we've seen definitely positive changes over the past year with the Prime Minister's office, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, the Addis Ababa Hotel Association, and Tourism Ethiopia. In terms of moving on to, I guess, the hotel demand and the dynamics of Addis Ababa, we as a group kind of see the corporate, NGO, and diplomatic demand to increase over the next few years. The privatization of state-held assets to foreign investors and the influx of multinationals entering the market will definitely increase the demand of hotels in Addis Ababa and throughout Ethiopia. To give you some perspective on the performance of the market, in 2019, the Addis Ababa market was operating at occupancy levels of around 54%, with their average daily rates hovering around $149 to $155. And what's interesting to note is that both of these are decreases from 2018. And something that we noticed was this pressure on these rates were definitely attributed to increased supply entering the market. Because in 2019, we saw the Hyatt Regency and the Ethiopian Skylight Hotel enter the market. And this essentially added up to 550 rooms to the city. This essentially resulted in hotels either discounting the rates and to be more competitive and to, I guess, capture that share of the market. So that's been really interesting to see. And despite this, Addis Ababa has been known to have one of the highest ADRs in Africa, at least in East Africa in that regard. And we can see the pipeline improving, but I guess I can address that later on in terms of the investment dynamics. From a supply standpoint, currently I think at Addis, there are probably around up to 9,000 hotel rooms spread out through 152 hotels. And this is the figures that were provided from the Hotel Association. And currently, I believe most of these properties are still unbranded. And we've seen a trend towards mid-scale products, not the uber luxury, but the more mid-scale brands. like, I guess, target more business and MICE segment travelers who are either in town for business or for conferences, meetings, and events. And that's something that we have seen as a whole. But it's important to note that I believe since 2015, there have been around 21 internationally branded hotels which are under development in the market. And this will essentially add up to 4,000 rooms to the local supply. And what we noticed was that many brands and owners have seen the limited supply of quality branded rooms as an encouragement to maximize their presence in the country. For example, the Ibis Styles Hotel, which was announced several months ago, the development of the Lagar project, which will include 2 internationally branded hotels, and also the development of properties throughout the country in Bahar Dar, in Mekelle, and Awassa. We started to see that trend moving towards secondary cities, and we believe that this just showcases the business fundamentals and the investment drive in other industries, which will need these hotels to piggyback off of. But even though all these pipeline projects are likely that all of these hotels will open, that is notorious in Addis and the country as a whole is the delay of projects, either the scrapping of agreements, and I guess these hotels never coming to light. And we've realized that this has been down to constraints in accessing foreign currency, which is a huge problem in the country, getting fair and affordable financing from private banks, and other factors, either in political stability or owners not having a clear strategy to get their project to light. But we will definitely see the supply cycle be more spread out. And this will be a positive note because we believe it would have been very difficult for the market to absorb all of these rooms within the short period of time. So that's something we are very interested to see what happens down the next few years.
Interesting insight, David. On your recently published interesting report titled Spotlight on Ethiopia, Hotel Market Overview, by the way, highly recommended for our listeners to check it out. Short and to the point. Would they find it on your website, for instance, David?
Yes, so it's available on our website at jll.co.za, or it is also available through our Twitter feed, which it's JLL Africa. So if anyone likes to read it, please do. As Khalid said, it's very short, straight to the point, and kind of highlights the overall industry as a whole. And we believe it will be very valuable to investors from either real estate perspective or the hospitality industry as well.
Excellent. One of the, among many numbers that stood out to me was we're looking at 43% of 3-star hotel supply positioning. And I would say about 80% penetration of independent or unbranded establishments versus branded, right? Now, as we're talking about the rise of international hotels, some of which you've kind of listed out earlier in Ethiopia, this number remains to be pretty low, right? Is this a foreseeable trend going into the future, or would more branded establishments keep joining the market? Maybe sort of to ask you another question related to the relative shortage of different types of hotels. I think people who've lived abroad, especially in the kind of developed part of the world, you'd have smaller inns, themed hotels, gastro hotels, and so on, which we seem to be lacking. Is this a question or a problem of demand or market inefficiencies, or is this something that could come into an Ethiopian kind of hotel market in the future?
Very good question. One thing that we noticed is there has been a shift away from the development of luxury hotels in Addis. At this moment, if we can name luxury properties, it would probably be the Hyatt Regency, the Sheraton Addis. And then you have the upper upscale properties such as the Radisson and the Hilton, for that matter. But when it comes to these new developments, specifically the independent brands, it seems that the market has just followed a cookie cutter approach where they failed to address the character and identity of the properties. For example, if you walk into any 5 locally independent properties, you're going to see the same theme, the same kind of marble flooring, the same room layout, the same design, and it kind of affected the whole entire, vision or appeal of the hotel market.
Mhm.
But one thing that we've definitely seen is the interest in the mid-scale and budget properties due to the fact that, one, Ethiopia is trying to target more leisure travelers, and these people are most probably traveling on a budget and wouldn't be able to chunk out the $250 per night rates at these luxury branded hotels. So most of the pipeline entering Ethiopia is essentially in the mid-scale and mid-scale 3-star and, should I say, upscale segments, which we believe will tap into the meetings and incentive crowd, which will definitely be pulled by the development of the Addis Ababa Exhibition Center and also the Addis Ababa International Conference Center out by the summit area. So I think it's probably due to market inefficiencies and individuals not understanding the pipeline and not really aware of where the market has been driving. So that's something I think is a problem. But at the same time, you do see small hotels popping up in Addis who have that character, who have that boutique feel. Just to name a few, I can say the Louvre Hotel, for example. Perfectly designed on a French oasis in the heart of Addis, tastefully designed, and it kind of has that, should I say, feel that it's different, it's unique. And I think that's if people are going to continue moving, or if they're interested in doing an independent hotel and managing it themselves, that's the direction they should go in. If you're looking to open a 100-key plus hotel, you're probably more likely to lean on the service expertise of major brands who have access to global distribution systems, who can tap into the millions of loyalty followers throughout the world, and it will make it more attractive to travelers. And it's been known whenever you have a major announcement of a hotel brand in the market, it's likely to create a stir and buzz, and that can lead to people understanding or becoming incentivized to travel to Ethiopia.
Interesting, very interesting insights. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the impact of COVID-19 in the hospitality sector. Of course, the outbreak of COVID-19 is having a very severe impact in the hospitality, but all over the world as well. You also mentioned it in your report. Also, the Ethiopian Hotel Association also gave a public address saying that back in April, almost 88% of the hotels are partially or fully closed. How do you assess the impact of COVID-19 in the hospitality sector and the overall economy?
Mm-hmm. So definitely, as you noted from the report, that many hotels in Addis were forced to close their doors to significant decline in demand. But one thing that needs to be noted is COVID has not only impacted hotels, but it has also impacted secondary businesses, whether it be taxis, transportation, airline, restaurants, gift shops, and everything as a whole. So the whole entire impact of COVID has been on the travel and tourism segment as a whole, and it's impacted thousands of jobs. This decrease in travel, the issuing of health advisories definitely led to cancellations, and it's likely that we will not see a recovery to 2019 level until at least 2023, if we're lucky. And if you want to look at the numbers from a more on a lower level, like tourist arrivals in Ethiopia have been decimated over the past 6 months. Between the months of January and June 2020 alone, Ethiopia only recorded 127,000 visitors. And if you put this in comparison to last year, the same period in 2019, that is a 67% decline. Wow. So you can envision all these hotels, all these businesses that relied on tourists, on business travelers, their revenue essentially has been cut off. And these are people who have bank loans to pay, who have staff to keep on their payroll. And it's very difficult to see how they've been able to navigate the system. Obviously, the government announced the issuing of around 15 billion birr loans to various industries impacted. But there wasn't really any clear address on how these funds were, should I say, distributed. And if these properties are able, or are they still staying afloat despite this? And what you've seen is many hotels pivoting from their typical operational procedure and focusing on carry-out meals, on trying to sell rooms to locals in the market just for a getaway from people's homes, because obviously people have been locked up out of fear for the virus. So it's been very interesting to see. And I know for a fact that the Hotel Association is essentially planning to roll out a initiative alongside, I believe, Tourism Ethiopia on how the market can recover, especially as we've seen flights resuming in and out of Ethiopia and many markets on the continent opening up. But when we speak on COVID, it's not only Ethiopia, it's the continent as a whole. According to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, between January and April, tourist arrivals to the continent decreased by 35%. And based on what's happening, new figures coming out, the likely scenario is when I guess you'll see a positive increase in arrivals will probably be end of December 2020 or towards mid-21. So it's going to be interesting to see how these countries deal with it and how they're able to recover. And just to give you context, for example, in South Africa, I think news just broke that the country is just about to open its borders to travelers in and out of the country. And this is a country that's probably imposed one of the strictest lockdown measures in the world. Since March, there's been no international or commercial flights into the country, only repatriation flights, and that's it. And it has definitely impacted their economy, which is essentially funded or supported by tourism revenues. And to give you some context, in last year alone, they had 10 million visitors to the country.
Wow.
And if you look at all those businesses, from tour travel agents to tour operators to, I guess, nature parks, this has been a huge impact. And another case is news that came out today in Kenya. Compared to August of last year, tourist arrivals have decreased by 91%. So it just shows you how various countries are suffering, and it's not just one country, or it's a collective problem that will hopefully that everyone will recover from. And there's optimism moving forward, but that's more likely once, I guess, a vaccine is developed and people regain the confidence to travel.
Yeah, that's actually something to wait to be seen. In your assessment, I mean, you earlier indicated that the government injected close to almost 15 billion birr of credit line to the hospitality sector in order to make them to stay afloat. And also, in addition, the government also lifted interest on their loans, extended their loan repayments, and all that. Do you think these measures have somehow mitigated the impact in the hotel industry? Do you think it's enough, or should the government should have done more to reduce the impact?
And that's a very good question. But to clarify, I believe the 15 billion birr was to several industries, not only the hotel industry. So, of course, like many hotels started to slash their interest rates. They short forbearance period, because it's important to note that most of these hotels are built off of debt and money financed from local banks. And if you have no revenue coming in, of course, these small measures will definitely help in maintaining your cash flow. But these initiatives only lasted for several months, if I'm correct. But nonetheless, of course, it's positive. It's helpful. Industries from horticulture to manufacturing to the hospitality industry were able to access these funds. But there was only so much the government can do. And I believe they're taking the right approach moving forward with the reopening of flights and various destinations in Addis and throughout the country.
Interesting. David, let's try to kind of look at some of the national development policy agendas that were developed by the government, some of which actually are mentioned in the report. Homegrown Economic Reform Agenda, the 10-year plan, which have listed tourism, as you may know, one of the pillars, I would say, for economic growth. And it seems much needed attention is now being paid to tourism as a whole by the government. How helpful would you say this is to the sector? And do you support it? And do you think more should be done as well? For instance, when you look at our visitor arrivals, as you've talked about, are still below 1 million, if I'm not mistaken. Would you say this is the right time for the government to wake up to this?
Definitely. I think it's the perfect opportunity for the government to recollect and formulate a strategy moving forward. Because once everything returns to normal, you're going to see a potential increase in travel from not only international, but also within the continent. And I believe that what's necessary at this moment is the development of, one, a domestic tourism agenda, two, intra-Africa travel, appealing to other markets on the continent where in the past has not really been a key source market. Three, and also, like I said, proper planning and implementation of facilities and, should I say, assistance at tourism sites. When you're speaking about the Beautifying Shega project, of course, it has done a great job in opening up various parts of Addis to people who have rarely had the opportunity to explore these places. For example, Unity Park and the access to Menelik Palace, the recently opened, I believe it's Shagir Friendship Park, just across from the Sheraton Addis. And also what's very interesting now is the Ntoto Natural Park. And as many of their listeners might know, this park has been going through a extreme renovation, the development of paths, the partnership between private and public institutions to invest in attractions in the Ntoto Hills. And this ranges from cafes to luxury glamping, which is essentially luxury camping as a whole. Developing of activities from go-karting to paintballing to zip lining. So these are all activities that I think can help spark a increase in, I guess, tourism revenue from both a domestic and an international standpoint. Because something that's really key to note is Ethiopian Airlines being essentially the backbone of travelers to Ethiopia, around 70% of all their travelers are transit passengers. So if you look at, let's say, 13 million people using the airline, rough estimate, like around 7 million people travel through Addis Ababa airport. And one astounding figure is that less than, let's say, 300,000 of these visitors leave the airport. And I think that's something that Ethiopian Airlines, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and Tourism Ethiopia have been focusing on. And that is why this Beautifying Shega project will likely lead to more travelers getting out of the airport, interested in shopping for a stopover deal, something that's been successful in countries such as Portugal and Iceland, where individuals are given the opportunity at no cost to changing their flight ticket to stay in the country, to explore, to, I guess, generate revenues in that country. And I feel like these projects at Addis will definitely be helpful for individuals who might have an 8-hour layover or who might be interested in spending a night in town. But as I'm sure you've heard, the Prime Minister's office is also planning to develop sites in Wenchi, in Gorgora, and I forgot the name of the other destination, but these three projects are Nikosha, exactly. Thank you for that. Yeah. So definitely, like, by working with the private sector and the government, I guess, supporting in the development of infrastructure in these areas, you will have a more attractive tourism product. And I think that's something that Ethiopia has not done in the past.
Yeah.
When you look at the country as a whole, Ethiopia is essentially relies on its historical and cultural assets, moving from the Northern Circuit, which includes Bahar Dar, Gondar, Lalibela, and Oxen. And if you look at Abtale being in the Danakil Depression, for example, it's known to attract thousands of people every single year. However, there's Ethiopia for the country to invest and promote in other attractions throughout the country, in the south and the central areas. Because if you have a more diversified product and something that appeals to both travelers from more developed countries and people from the continent, you'll see, I guess, an uptake or increase in arrivals. And you brought up the point about arrivals in Ethiopia decreasing. I think the highest level we've ever reached was in 2017, where there were around 933,000 arrivals. 2019 saw this arrival figure drop to 811,000. So there's definitely room to grow. And the reason for this dip is probably due to increased competition from regional countries and I guess political unrest as well. If you look at East Africa or the region as a whole, you have nations such as Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania who have done exceptionally well in promoting. In addition, the appeal of experiencing a combination of both a safari and beach destination have essentially steered travelers away from Ethiopia into these markets in Kenya and Tanzania, where packages are affordable and they're much more competitive. To give a case, let's look at the Masai Mara market in Kenya. Individuals are, let's say, travelers from Europe, Asia, and the Americas. These individuals are looking for wildlife, looking to look at the big five. And at the end of their trip, they tend to take a little breather and go to the beaches in Diani. And the same thing can be said in Tanzania, where people travel to Serengeti, fly directly into Kilimanjaro, which is say it's with Ethiopian Airlines, continue to fly to Zanzibar, which is another established beach destination, and then fly back out on Ethiopian Airlines. These people have essentially flown past the country, which has so much to offer. And I think it just comes down to product diversity in the country. And I feel like these new projects will definitely help. But there's also a need for more collaboration and a more clear approach from all the players, whether it be Ethiopian Airlines, the Ethiopian Tourism Promotion Body, and the Prime Minister's Office. And I think we're seeing that come to light now. They're doing an amazing job, and I'm sure within the next few months, we'll see a concrete plan in place to promote Ethiopia to the future.
Yeah, we hope so too. I'm glad you mentioned the three projects which the Prime Minister announced for the Gorogoro, Wenchi, and Kosha green projects. As you know, the hospitality sector and the hotel industry is very highly concentrated here in Addis Ababa, and I think you sort of touched upon it. It needs to be dispersed. The hotel industry needs to spread out, open up their shops in the secondary cities. There are different sites all over the country. What do you think it needs to be done in order to disperse the industry to other part of the country? And do you think this kind of projects such as Gorogoro, Wenchi, and Kosha would help to sort of like spread out the hospitality sector in the country?
Without a doubt. These projects will, if they're continue with the same scale and gravitas as Unity Park and Ndoto Park, you will definitely see more attractions and more products available to travelers. But I think it kind of stems down to the infrastructure that's available in these cities and locations. When it comes to air travel within Ethiopia,
Absolutely.
Ethiopian Airlines does a great job domestically. They have flights daily to every single corner of the country. But the thing is, when you get onto the ground, you don't have the quality products that attract people to go there, or the activities, to say the least. It can be said in the south, in the Gambela region with the Omo National Park and the Gambela National Park. These are untapped destinations who have the opportunity to promote Ethiopian wildlife, which once again is in dire need of assistance and I guess funding. Conservation can be a huge aspect to look at, and that can be replicated in other destinations too. One thing you usually hear from travelers is that whenever they travel on these routes, there's a lack of facilities and a lack of infrastructure to support them and ensure that their trip is a success. Case in point, the journey to Danakil and Atale. I'm not sure if you've ever traveled on this route, but one thing that is evident is that there's essentially no stopping destination. There's no tourist center.
Yes.
Everything is done very informal. I've heard stories of individuals throwing their plastic bottles out of the car and into the middle of the area because there's nowhere else to put the trash. And the same thing applies to the trek in climbing the mountains in Garalta. These are all places that are experiences people would love to do, but then the fact that there's not enough of support and I guess, should I say, tourist facilities and centers there, it's not really attractive for people. They see it as a risk potentially. And having a more structured tourism center, links with travel guides, translators, tour guides as well, this will definitely help increase customer confidence and ability to travel. And I believe the Ministry of Culture has recently released a plan to manage or develop and invest in some of the 7,000 sites that have been registered in the country. But obviously, I think this was put on hold due to the coronavirus pandemic, which occurred.
Interesting. I'm actually glad, David, that you mentioned about some of the issues that tourists face when going through the travel undertakings here. Now, lots of issues are raised from the experiences of tourists who visit Ethiopia, right? Some of them, for instance, sort of a mere absence of far-reaching promotional work about Ethiopia. So not many people actually know about Ethiopia at all. But also logistics and travel undertakings that are not usually well organized, sometimes expensive in nature. Sometimes you'd have price manipulation, especially toward foreigners.
Exactly.
Question is, how do we, like, in your expert sort of opinion, how do we modernize our tourism attraction efforts so that services can hopefully be seamless, professional, ethical, and consistent?
I think this comes down to, I guess, not only control, but effective communication from the central promotion body and the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. I think that's going to be the main driver to improve these factors. Like you said, when it comes to having structured tour guides, having information readily available to people, this is something that can easily be done. There's a lot of talk about how tech is going to be key to the development of Ethiopia. This is a sector how tech and tourism can overlap, where people create short guides, a short directory of information for people to find, like a little marketplace for travelers to reach out to local vendors and suppliers who can help make their trip significantly better. So I think that's one thing that definitely needs to be done. And to touch upon that point about pricing, pricing is notoriously expensive here in Ethiopia. Even and I think the market kind of just focuses more on international tourists and neglects or all the people Ethiopians domestically and residents willing to travel around the country. One thing that you can see is, for example, with airfare. If you've flown into Ethiopia on Ethiopian Airlines, you're able to pay residents or local fees for flights throughout the domestic network. And this also applies to individuals with residence cards. However, if you fly in with another international airline, let's say Emirates or Lufthansa, you're going to be charged the international fare, which is around 2 to 3 times higher. And that is already a huge deterrent from people, because they can easily fly to Tanzania and use a local airline and at a fraction of the price. And also when it comes to pricing, I think for some reason everything in this country is based off USD in local currency. But let's be realistic, because traveling, let's say to Arba Minch, you're paying $150 a night for a room is pretty expensive. And you're essentially cutting out a huge portion of the population. So I think that's something that also needs to be addressed, and either having rate caps or having a more consistent pricing strategy that is fair and available to everyone. I'm going to give another example right now. Let's say traveling to Thailand. It's probably one of the cheapest destinations to fly to. Airfares are lower than when I say travel from Addis Ababa to Bangkok compared to Addis Ababa to Accra for that matter. And once you get on the ground in this country, you have hostels, you have cheap accommodation as well as luxury accommodation that addresses the whole entire market. If you're a backpacker, you can easily rent out a little moped and take off on the streets in exploring the country. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed and something that can be replicated here in Ethiopia because we have the space, we have the attractions. I don't think over tourism is going to be an impact immediately, but at least it'll give an opportunity to promote the country better and make it more appealing to young people. And not only young people, but also people who are near retirement who want to go on an either cultural or historical trip. And I believe the country has these assets, and it's just a matter of bringing it to the table and having all the stakeholders in one room. And I think that's key. Many times information is not really publicly available, or it's done behind closed doors. But by opening it up, showcasing what can be done, involving the private sector and the government is going to be key to finding investors, both locally and internationally. And yeah, I'm not sure if that kind of addressed your question, but
it sure did, David. Just to sort of wrap up with my final question, and maybe if you could just answer this briefly. One of the major, I would say, bottlenecks we see in the hospitality industry is the shortage of professionally trained human capital. And I think this is partly why we witness a lot of poaching of employees from, say, an old hotel to a new one. I think it also remains questionable to what extent hotel training institutes in the country, and I think there are very, very few, hold to those high standards of teaching. What's your take on this? How do you assess these deficiencies and the kind of perhaps solutions that could be brought to the table?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, I would say for the Ethiopian hospitality industry, everything starts and ends with education. Mm-hmm. And that is something that we've seen in the market. There are a very limited number of hospitality graduates in the market, and otherwise, same thing with qualified candidates. And this makes it very difficult for employers to, I guess, recruit and hire new people. And you brought up the point of poaching, which is very common. I've seen it on, I guess, a month-to-month basis. Whenever there's a new hotel, everyone, they go around and people apply for a new job because they believe it comes with better appeal and better pay. But this is due to the fact there is not enough, I guess, qualified supply in the market. Most hotels in Addis have essentially gone as far as creating their own training programs and development programs at their own properties, because one, it is very difficult to take a fresh graduate from university and throw them into the service industry. Service industry trades don't come naturally, or they do come naturally, should I say, but they can also be instilled and trained. So when it comes to dealing with customers, etiquette, understanding of the property, like wider business as a whole, and the ability to inform people to make their stay better. And I've seen this, especially let's say Capital Hotel has their own training program. Kuriftu themselves have a 6-month rotation program where all these fresh graduates are put through a rotational experience. So this is key, but at the same time, it's expensive. But it's also necessary, to say the least, because you ensure that these employees gain experience in a working environment. But for individuals or hotels that want to avoid this, the best thing they can do is go and offer a more, attractive salary and job title to someone working on their property. But I believe human capital should be viewed as a challenge and an opportunity for both the hospitality, restaurants, hotels, everything you name it. But at this moment, you do have your programs at universities who have certificates in hotel management, and you have the Catering and Tourism Training Institute, which is run by the government. And I believe they released a strategy 2 years ago to improve the capacity and quality of their graduates. But I think it's a wider issue. And Something I would recommend and something I believe will be very valuable is incorporating a work requirement into the curriculum at these universities and programs. To give an example, at Cornell, all students in the hotel program are required to complete 800 hours of work in the field, either be on campus or during summer breaks before graduating from the program. And what this did was ensure that students had to apply classroom theory into real world practice. And it doesn't have to be only in a hotel. It can be in finance, it can be in banking, it can be in cafes, in the kitchen. It's a very broad experience, but as long as people are able to bridge that divide and understand what they're learning in classrooms, it'll be very difficult to ensure people can be thrust into the job market. From my personal standpoint, before I went to Cornell after graduating from Stanford, I asked for an internship at the Sheraton Undies. And I essentially did a 1-month rotational program working in various departments. From housekeeping to the front desk to sales and marketing, and also working in the kitchen. So that was very eye-opening. It was a great way to, it was a great pre-activity before going to school. And then at school, I found a way to work on campus at the hotel, which is essentially adjoined to the school. And I worked as a bellhop, I worked as a valet, I worked as a server for banquets and events. And like I said, this improved my knowledge, my understanding, and ability to understand what goes down through every single aspect of a hotel or business. And that's something I recommend, or I hope can be introduced at a university level. Because not only will it give people experience, but it might even provide them with income during the summer months when schools are closed in Ethiopia.
Wonderful. I think I would say that would be a very valuable recommendation for the hospitality sector, and especially for the education policy, in terms of, in order to equip the youngsters getting the experience required in the hospitality sector. On that note, David Desta, associate with JLL's Hotel and Hospitality Group, thank you for coming on the show and to share your wonderful insights and to talk about JLL and the hospitality sector of Ethiopia and the challenge and also the opportunities. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for our listeners too.
Thank you so much to Addis. Thank you so much to Addis Business Talk, to you, Mered, and Khalid. It was very insightful. And just to close off, it's like one little note. I definitely believe the country continues to offer excellent long-term fundamentals with the tourism industry. Despite the challenges we're facing now, the recovery will be key. And I believe we have the right institutions and the right leadership to ensure we come out of this on top. And that's essentially what I like to say.
Preach, David.
Couldn't agree more.
All right. Thank you guys so much. And
thanks.
Addis Business Talk. This has been Addis Business Talk with Khalid and Mered every Thursday morning from 7:30 to 8:30 on Afro FM 105.3. For important updates, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @TalkAddis. On LinkedIn and Facebook, simply search for Addis Business Talk. Addis Business Talk.